Welcome back to Magic and the Noise. Today we're going to talk to you about an incredible session that David tasked me with. It covers incredible things, maybe a warning, maybe omens of what's to come, civilization collapse, the effects on human consciousness, why we see evidence of all these ancient, seemingly advanced cultures and structures all over the world. What happened? We might have a clue here.
Yes, you brought back some incredible remote viewing data. There's these little hobbit skeletons that were dug up on the island of Flores in Indonesia. The archaeologists dug those guys up, and I wanted to know, what was their level of intellect? What was their culture like? What kind of tools did they actually work with and use? Because the scientists or archaeologists would have us believe it's very basic pointy sticks, like that's about as good as they get kind of thing, right? And it's like, well, but is that really what it was, or was it different? And I didn't know. So Sasha was blindly tasked this. What was interesting is that you didn't just sort of encapsulate that information. You told a larger epoch, however you say it, of information about potentially the journey that these people went through, in a way, what kinds of things in the environment they had to deal with. So your data, to me, started out a long time ago, before the last ice age, and you had what appeared to be interaction with these folks with giants, but also they were associated in your session with the pyramid in Indonesia that has the standing stones. That's the other thing I thought was interesting. Most people, when they draw a pyramid in a remote viewing session, it's going to be a pyramid like at Giza, or it's going to be a step pyramid, but you actually drew a pyramid that looked like it actually was made of standing stones, and that pyramid is actually very close to where the hobbit's body was found. And of course, there's going to be hobbits all through that area, right? It's not just one tiny skeleton, that's a whole race of hobbits. So it's not surprising that they would be interacting with that pyramid, but that to me was really strong target contact. And so could you tell me a little more about what you thought about this interaction?
The pyramid that was found nearby was on Gunung, and the hobbits, they were found on the Isle of Flores.
Yeah.
If you're looking at prior to the past ice age, these little islands, they would have been connected by land bridges. I saw these little tiny human-like creatures, but they were living in the middle of giants who were significantly more technologically advanced. They were the builders of the pyramid that I saw. They were the architects of these magnificent, huge structures. And the little hobbit guys, they were just kind of living amongst them.
It's pretty clear in my mind that we've had ancient civilizations. If you look at enough information, maybe mainstream doesn't want to acknowledge it, but there's so much fragmented things that just don't make sense. But they do make sense in the context of civilizations that have been wiped out over time. In terms of that particular pyramid, which is interesting, because again, your data did show that this was occurring prior to the Ice Age, at least the last one, maybe even further back, but you had some indication for this pyramid of intellect or conceptual idea of how they were interacting with this pyramid from a point of consciousness. Is that right?
Yes. Oh my goodness. There are two interfaces with consciousness constructs. And so I did get this idea of the pyramids that were built seemed to be a physical manifestation that they were building here as a representative of something perfect, something ideal in an ideal plane. We might think of it these days as, the Akashic records is where like the information in its perfect form resides. And philosophers would talk about like the Platonic ideals. The data came through for the pyramids was they are accessing this field where the perfect pyramid exists, and then they're trying to manifest it here in our physical plane. And then by doing that, it seemed like they were also maybe creating an opening for some consciousness of that pyramid, because we know as remote viewers, the data that we interact with, there's an intelligence there.
Yeah, there absolutely is. Yeah.
And so it seems like when you're interacting with those Platonic forms, maybe they're not just these conceptual things that exist, that there's some spark of consciousness within them.
Did you have like energy or something coming out of the top of the pyramid?
I did, yes. That there was a machine-like component to it. And that part of the purpose of the pyramid itself, when I probed for purpose and function, was somehow calendrical, like a marker. I really do think, looking at the data as it all came together and the data that just poured through me, it was marking something significant. It seems like it was marking the collapse. And it looks like, from the data and the way it came through, the urgency that it came through with, that we might be going back through that cyclical collapse again. And that's why I really wanted to talk to you about this today and share it with the audience.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, we'll cover that information as well. But one of the things I wondered about the culture, the technology, right? And what you're describing is more than just some random rocks that they piled up into a pyramid, right? So that part's interesting and feeds in with the target question. I think from your session work with some of what I looked at, and I'm not saying this is the case, it gave me the impression maybe that the pyramids were constructed possibly to strengthen the magnetic field of the earth, like to maybe help with imbalances with, like you said, cyclical periods that they kind of understood. And maybe these pyramids, like I don't know if we could register today, but it doesn't necessarily, like the equipment, but I don't know that that necessarily means that it can't have an effect on the strengthening the magnetic sphere of the planet, which would then help with other potential issues that occur with instability of it, right?
It really did come through as a machine, as having this calendrical purpose, marking time, marking changes. And I think that's why it is kind of an omen. It is kind of a warning of like, look, you guys need to pay attention to the stars, the sun, the location of these things, and when they change. In one part of my session, I kept seeing the constellations, and it took me, a while to figure out what's happening here. And they were shifting and tilting, and it happened rapidly and suddenly, this shift of the constellations. And I think that that's like a precursor of like, it's happening. Everything is changing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Your data as a whole described that in great detail, talked about the different ages, but also about the ice age and then the effects of the flooding and the land bridges and stuff disappearing and all that, which is fascinating. Which, you think of this little hobbit trying to make his journey through that chaos to survive it, very difficult, which would make sense as to why some of these races might not be around today because it was just too catastrophic, essentially. But the other thing that I see tying in with this to a degree is I'd watched the new Netflix series Graham Hancock has.
I haven't seen it yet, but I'm hearing good things.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And in there, one of the episodes, I think it was maybe the island of Malta, they had tagged it time-wise to the end of the last ice age.
Okay.
So as things are starting to kind of come out of that period, they start building these megalithic structures that were pointed at a particular part of the sky. And they showed that on that island, over like hundreds of years, they would rebuild this structure and repoint it to the new location of what I think they were kind of indicating a threat that may have caused the actual ice age and that these people were tracking it. To me, that's interesting, but it also ties in with some of the data that you had in your session.
And I do wonder if it is something, like you're saying, something that causes a collapse, that causes a change in the sun. And in my data, when I probe for the cause, like what is causing this collapse that destroyed these civilizations that were fairly advanced, I kept coming back with the same thing. I tried probing it. I did 2 sessions on this target and I tried probing it in both because it came through in both. And I kept being shown the sun moves off its path. So the sun is moving on its track very regularly, very predictable. And then all of a sudden that path changes. But that change is also a natural cycle, and it's also predictable. When the sun changes on its path, then everything changes. The constellations all change. The ice age comes, and then the ice age melts. Like there's something there, and that we're at that stage again where the sun is about to shift off its regular path. I find that quite fascinating.
Yeah, it is very interesting about the changes of the magnetic field in your work. And can you comment on that?
I saw the magnetic field stable, and I saw the tree and the atmosphere and the conditions are very idyllic. And then there's like a shift, and then the magnetic field is collapsed and it's disordered. There's no pattern to it anymore. And I see that the tree is dead and it's bleak. There's no atmosphere and everything is just dead. There's this third shift, and then the magnetic field has reemerged and it's all regular in pattern, but it's a different pattern now. And the atmosphere is back, but it's different. There's a different quality to it, that the sun is a slightly different color to it. There are a lot of things that we take for granted that mainstream popular science tells us, oh, this is a fact. But when you really dig into it, it's not. It's just a theory, and there's some problems with that theory. And even the mainstream model that we use today, they're talking about the coming collapse of the Earth's magnetic field.
Right. I don't know the exact details of the specs, but I've seen it over time in the last decade. You look at some of the impacts of the sun's effect on the Earth, and the shield is weak enough where you see these weird, you can see it collapsing in portions of the field momentarily, right? Things that didn't necessarily show up, 20 or 30 years ago when they were tracking this stuff. Now you're seeing more kind of extreme effects, which indicates something's happening, even if the mainstream's not necessarily talking about it in a way that's understood.
Like the aurora borealis being significantly lower. That was
Right.
one of the things I saw as well. I saw them going into a shelter and they were looking through the glass. They were looking outside, and the aurora borealis, the northern lights, were incredible all over the sky. But they were sheltering from that. I think that's a sign that we are re-experiencing what they experienced right before their collapse. That's concerning to me.
As it should be, considering old Frodo's buried in a grave right now. But the other question I have about that is, because you talked about them going into the shelter, if the field is actually collapsing, you talked about some of them, their minds are being erased or they're confused, things of that nature. But if they're underground, they're closer to the core of the earth, would the magnetic field be stronger such that the coherence of their mind, if it's associated with the field, actually works better by going not just like, oh, horrible environmental effects, underground's better protection, like, okay, that's logical, but maybe there's an effect also with on the thinking, the mind operation actually works better if you go underground under those conditions. I don't know if that's true.
Well, if the Earth's magnetic field collapses, then the radiation from the sun will destroy life on the surface. And so the survivors would be the people in the bunkers underground, especially if you're under granite. And so all these underground shelters we find, I think it's Cappadocia and Turkey, where they have underground cities. Russia has built huge underground cities, enough for all their citizens to
It's
go.
just a real estate development. It's for money. It's all good.
To protect yourself from those effects, you want to go underground. But what I saw that scared me, and I'm still trying to process it and I'm still trying to make sense of it, was it came through first when I was doing a tagging thing, which I do is like, give me an overview of the most important data in this session, right? And I do that at the beginning before I get into it. And it came through as solar gates came through, that the solar gates are changing. And this is before I did my session, so I had no idea what this is all about. But I saw it as like a degaussing of a computer disk, that there's solar gates and they change. And then this high-tech data storage device is essentially degaussed and all the data is erased. And when I was doing my sessions, when I was really deep in and the data was just pouring through me, this is what came through. When the field collapses, when this catastrophe occurs, some of the humans just become blank, like their memory is just completely erased. And so they're just blank. Some of the humans go mad. They just become feral, cannibalism, just violent. They're just animals. They're like wild animals and they're dangerous. And then some of the humans, they manage to maintain their coherence. And I think as remote viewers, that's what we're doing. We maintain our coherence of thought, of consciousness outside of our physical brain.
Right.
And I think more people need to learn to meditate, learn to remote view, learn to keep your consciousness coherent, even if your brain is messed with, because I think that that's what I saw. I really had this strong sense of, look, this is important, this is urgent. Sasha, listen up. That's what the data was saying, right?
Yeah.
So there's going to be some humans that their memory is erased. We know with like transcranial, when you apply magnetic fields to people's brains, they do that to do different experiments and they do get different effects. And it looks like when this happens, people's memories are just wiped. But then you have, I think, like a priest class. And I think this is what ties it to our knowledge that gets transferred through maybe secret societies, because it seemed like some individuals had what we can do with remote viewing, what really good meditators can do. They were able to keep the coherence of their memory, of their self, of their consciousness. And so they maintain their memories. But then when the new magnetic field reemerges, people come back up to the surface, maybe you have 10 or 12 people in a city of 200,000 that have that. So now you're trying to rebuild from the rubble, but most people around you are either wild animals or just completely memory blanked.
Yeah, it would be an interesting component as to why, if there were advanced civilizations prior to the Ice Age, not only just the loss of knowledge through oral over time. Again, I don't know. Like if there was some 1% of the humans were able to keep their memories out of the whole planet, like we would not. Our civilization would not survive in its current form. It just wouldn't happen because it wouldn't have enough skills and knowledge and so on and so forth. They couldn't teach people fast enough to. It just wouldn't happen. But the other part of that is the potential that even if they use different technology than we use today, whatever their tech looked like. Because again, if you could build these pyramids, I'm sorry, it's probably not what everybody thinks, like some simple thing where you're just using leverage and all this other stuff. I'm sure that's part of it, but I'm saying like, no, they're, in my opinion, more sophisticated than that, just from the evidence I've seen. But whatever their technology might have looked like, even if it was different from ours, if it was affected by the magnetic fields and it basically nullified or neutralized it, not only if you had some small part of the population that could actually hold on to their memories, but then they couldn't even use the technology because it was worthless, like that's like too much to actually come back from in terms of rebuilding your civilization to its former glory at least. So yeah, it's interesting.
It's comparable to like if we had an EMP go off
globally.
and all your computers, all your cars, your cell phones, all of that is dead. And then
worthless.
also 90% of people have no memory, and a certain percentage are wild feral animals. How do you rebuild? This is some of the knowledge that I think secret societies pass on, and a lot of it has been lost. Even in the secret societies, they haven't done a good job of maintaining the integrity of the information. This touches on the harvest. Some of this I can talk about because the data came through, and it came through like this information needs to be known. But sometimes in my sessions I get data and I do get the feeling of like, this is just for me, or
Okay.
It's more private. I'll talk about things that are in public knowledge, I guess. People talk about the harvest of souls that's coming. I did get the sense that what's coming, what happened before, when this collapse occurs and this consciousness interruption occurs. In the Bible, they talk about the 3 days of darkness. I think if you're going to describe a moment where consciousness is suspended,
right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have the sun, then how do you track that there's 3 days of, right? Like if you look at 3 days of darkness, there was no sun, but then how did they know it was 3 days? But if you just think of it as like there's this suspension of your consciousness for a moment, and then when you come back, some people don't get that back. And so I did also get the sense of like, for some people, they are set free, they are released. For this group of people who can maintain that coherence, there's the option of being set free. I'm still trying to puzzle through that because I don't know enough. I've heard of these ideas about our existence here, and people have different ideas of what we're doing here and how it works, and are we in a simulation, or are the aliens harvesting our souls, right? And so I'm trying not to put into the data what didn't come through from the pure source. I'm trying to keep out my own biases. But there's something about this isn't a time where those who can maintain that consciousness, some of them are set free. If you believe in reincarnation cycles, then maybe it's kind of like this is the door, and those solar gates opening, those 3 doors. I wonder if you read the book of Enoch, he talks about these gates, and sometimes they're open and sometimes they're closed. And I wonder if there's something about these solar gates. This is a moment where maybe you can exit the system, the cycle, the whatever it is that we're in. I wonder if maybe that's a point of exit. And if you don't exit then you're stuck until the next, right? The next, I don't know, 45,000 years or whenever the next cycle is. I don't think it's every 13,000 years. I know the last ice age ended 13,000 years ago, but I have a feeling that this particular part of it is less frequent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and again, there was a lot of data in your session, a lot of ideas, a lot of concepts, a lot of density to it. So on any of these elements that are esoteric or tying together different concepts, but in a way that maybe hasn't been fully explored or expressed, in a way where you can point to a book or an author or researcher, right, immediately, that's where the power of remote viewing could be used to go in with subsequent blind sessions to decode those key pieces of information that you're really interested in understanding for sure. Like, I have the correct understanding, I don't have the correct understanding, or there's these other pieces I'm not even aware of. It's a great way for us to do future sessions on that.
Another tie-in to these secret societies, the Freemasons in the higher echelons, they talk about building Solomon's temple as a consciousness construct. They are building the temple in that place where we get data from, where I saw these pyramids having their ideal forms in.
Okay.
the Freemasons use it. They build that temple in this other realm in consciousness. They go there, they set their intention there, and then that ripples through our reality so that they can affect reality to their best interest, so that they can change things to their best interest. And I think that this is knowledge that came from before this catastrophe. And this is what those who were able to maintain their consciousness, their memories, I think it comes from them. I think that they were playing with that, and they were, maybe part of it is they were hoping to try to change it, but it's a natural cycle, and it happened anyway. And so I'm wondering now, we have all these secret societies who have this knowledge but maybe aren't sharing it. And I feel as though this is the time to share it, because I think we need to prepare. You have a lot more experience than I do in meditation. Is there any links that you would see between that and that coherent consciousness?
Yeah, my experience from meditation is that it allows you to still the mind, and of course, when you can do that, the intellect is not involved in that process, and in my opinion, you're able to access more of your psychic abilities. So in terms of consciousness constructs and interaction with those things, this would be more of a state that you could do that in, or would be more akin to a closer relationship with kind of how that operates. Like you're sort of operating in a way that might be similar to some of these other concepts that you're talking about. It would be more, whatever you want to call them, esoteric thought forms, concepts, whatever, speculation, whatever words you want to use. It's essentially you're in a state that's more able to interact with that type of thing than your normal state. So
being in a state where you're not analyzing, you're not doing analysis,
right.
You're not judging, you're just, the data pours through more purely, and you're feeling it rather than thinking about it, right?
Correct. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I think that there's something really important there. And so for me, this was a fascinating session to work.
Yeah, it was amazing data to see the level of detail and complexity that you brought back. And like I said, my initial task was just to try to understand these little folks and what their level of technology and culture was. And I didn't necessarily expect you to go back to the long time ago, the before time, when they had a higher level of civilization before the collapse. I didn't expect to see that. I just thought you'd be like, yeah, they were using little sticks, and it's like, no, they're like way different than that. Yeah.
This was such an amazing topic, and I really appreciate you giving me this as a target. And I appreciate the data stream for taking the opportunity to give me this download that I think is important for people to think about. Yeah,
it was a very interesting session. I appreciate you working it and providing the data. Again, I look at your data, the complexity of information that you can bring back is not standard. It's amongst the remote viewing community. I don't necessarily see a lot of people that can bring back tons of detail. There are some, of course, but I'm just saying in a general sense, I don't typically see it. So it's always, because I love details and complexity, so I appreciate that level of work. So thank you very much for working the target and sharing the results.
Cheers. And I hope that you guys watching this, I hope it was fun for you. This is a different format of video. Usually we kind of show more. This is what I saw on this page. But today we decided to do something a little bit different. Let us know what you thought. Do you like this format? Do you like the conversation? So was this fun for you?
Yeah, let us know.
So thank you so much, and good night.
Bye.
I was probing the pyramids, and I was getting the pyramids themselves had a spark of consciousness, and there was a black one which matches the Gunung Padang. You were talking about the Graham Hancock thing. They were black stones,
if I remember correctly. They're mostly the darker color black stone, if I'm not mistaken.
And so I saw this black pyramid. It was so angry because it was saying, it had this sense of like, it used to be venerated by worthy beings, and now it's not even understood. And that's not my judgment. That was the pyramid's judgment of the people that live on Earth now. It was just saying, you're not worthy of venerating me. You don't understand me. And I miss when I was venerated by worthy humans. And so I thought that was so fascinating.
Yeah, I guess if it had a consciousness that you could actually interact with, and the people in that period knew how to do that, and then that wasn't actually happening for God knows how long. I could see that.